All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you today. And I was this morning in Maryland, in Rockville, Maryland, of course, of course, because that's our county seat for Montgomery County where I live. I was at a meeting, whatever you want to call it, with some electeds on one fair wage. That is the legislation that would eliminate the tipped wage as a support for restaurant workers and others who are traditionally compensated, at least in part, through tips, through gratuity. So instead of using the tip as a supplement to some sort of hourly pay by the restaurant, instead the restaurants would be required, if one fair wage passes here. And it's passed in other places, including in Chicago, Washington, D.C. I believe it's the law in California. If it passes, then the restaurant will have to treat tipped, traditionally tipped workers like servers exactly the same as anybody else, like a line chef or a bouncer or anybody else, and that they pay them the minimum wage at a minimum. So I support that legislation. I think it's really important legislation. I think it will make life better for many people in Maryland, of course, if it's passed, or in Montgomery County if it's passed on a county level. And I think nationally it's something we really need. So, of course, I absolutely do support that law. But we're going to talk a little bit about it later on, where I think that the folks behind it, the organizers, may be pushing some of the wrong buttons to get what they and I want. And also, what should there be in the picture? Should we be looking at a broader, bigger picture for all working people, or is it sufficient right now to concentrate solely on tipped workers? And obviously, the legislation focuses on tipped workers. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but should the actual campaign itself be inclusive of other employees, other workers who may be receiving the minimum of $15 an hour or whatever it is in your particular jurisdiction or their particular state, but rather should we be saying, hey, this tipped wage needs to go. All workers should be paid a bare minimum of $15, $17, whatever, $25 an hour. And by doing this, by eliminating the tipped wage, the sub minimum wage, if you will, where at least in Maryland, I think the sub minimum wage, what restaurants are actually obligated to pay workers directly, is somewhere in the $3.25 range, somewhere around that. It's right over, just a little over $3. So I think we should should we make the argument, hey, this is definitely about restaurant servers. This is about bartenders. This is about people who get a gratuity at the end of the day. It's about drivers who are paid in part or in large part by a $5 bill handed to them at the end of the evening, or $15 added on a credit card voucher. Should we be saying this is better for them? Of course, but it's better for all workers. And we're not making the argument, I believe, at least not nearly as effectively as I would like, that yes, all workers will benefit. All right, if you want to join me, by the way, I thought I heard a little chime, but I don't think I did actually, or maybe I did, but it wasn't you. Call me, 240-242-5646. By the way, really enjoyed my conversation yesterday with Kelly Zemnikas, the filmmaker who documented the fight for the first responders at 9/11, who were fighting to save lives amidst the rubble of the Twin Towers. So really enjoyed that conversation. You can learn much more about it just by going to YouTube at Hal Ginsberg and by clicking on the link of yesterday's video. There's also links to ways you can get more involved specifically in that particular endeavor, that is justice for 9/11 victims, 9/11 first responders. By the way, don't forget, click subscribe, click like. Definitely need those subscriptions and likes. The subscription box is bottom right of your screen, blue and white square. I promoted this stream today as in the form of a question, which I often do. Why is it so hard for us to confront genocide? And again, this, I talk listen, if you think I'm talking too much about Israel, sorry. This is the biggest issue. I was doing the same with Ukraine, if you recall. We're talking about endless war here. We're talking about potential Armageddon. We're also talking about an incredibly morally fraught issue where we have moral obligations, right? I mean, people often, and I've said this, people often talk about what they would have done if they lived during the Holocaust, if they lived during slave times. What did, because in retrospect, there was, and at the time, it wasn't just retrospect, at the time it was very clear that these were truly evil regimes. They were mass murderers. They were enslavers. And they had targeted identifiable racial groups. That's what we call, frankly, genocide or ethnic cleansing. Or, again, slavery. I mean, I don't want to, it's only so many words. So clearly the moral obligation was clear. We had to fight that evil however we could, in whatever way we could. Well, we're faced with an evil that's stark right now, which is the Israel genocide in Gaza. And yet it seems so difficult for us even to break from Israel, let alone confront Israel, let alone take on Israel, let alone say to Israel, no, it's not just that we're not going to sell you arms, we're not going to give you aid, we're not going to support you, we're not going to protect you in the United Nations. It's not that we're going to stop doing all of that, although we will. We're actually going to actively aid Palestine to end the occupation, to end the ethnic cleansing, to end the genocide. And yet we completely have failed to do that. And so what I have trouble getting wrapping my head around is why this is so hard for us to do. And I'm really, really, really trying to figure it out. So if you have an answer, definitely call me, 240-242-5646. Now, I saw this article in yesterday's New York Times. So that was sort of interesting, right? Maybe it's generational, right? It's not that we collectively can't wrap our arms around Israel's evil. It's that some folks can't, right? Younger people, especially, or older people can't, right? Older Jewish people can't. But the problem is I know younger Christians who are all in for Israel. I know, older Christians who make every excuse in the book for Israel. Oh, it's complicated. You have to understand. No, I don't see what I have to understand. But it's not just a generational divide. Now, look, I'm older, right? I'm an old person. And yet I don't have any trouble with this. Some would say, well, you do. You don't get it, Hal. You're wrong. You just don't understand. You don't understand what it was like for these Jewish people, these survivors of the Holocaust. Well, I don't understand because no, I didn't survive the Holocaust. So I wasn't there. But I can imagine. One reason I can imagine is because, well, we do have pictures. They show us exactly what it was like during, they document. And of course, Ike did this, the Red Army, the Brits, they took pictures. They documented exactly what they saw. They saw dead bodies. And these weren't like people who had like bullet wounds from machine guns because they were on a battlefield. They were people who had just been murdered, flat out murdered in the millions by the Nazi regime. So you're right. I can't, know what it was like because I didn't live it, but I sure as hell can imagine how awful it was. And I totally get the impulse for a Jewish state, right? Well, look, we've been, kind of living in sufferance of these kings and Kaisers and dukes throughout Europe. And sometimes it's worked out okay. And other times, well, no, it hasn't, right? And other times, this is what we find out. This is what we see, right? So I get that. But none of that, not any of that, justifies what Israel is now doing to Gaza. It's doing to the Gazans exactly what Christians in Europe did. Some, not all Christians, by the way. Not every Christian was a Jew hater or an anti-Semite. But a lot were, right? I mean, they were told by their priests over and over, and the ministers and pastors and what have you, oh, they're the Christ killers. And then there was a lot of jealousy if the Jewish community was doing well, which they frequently were if the prince or king or duke needed financial assistance, or Jewish money lenders, estate managers and the like. Jewish people have always done well financially whenever they had an opportunity. And that, of course, will excite jealousy because people are what we are. We're jealous people and we want more for ourselves than for others, and we're tribal. So if somebody is in a different tribe and that tribe is rich and our tribe isn't as rich, we're going to be pissed off about it. So all of this is the history, right? I get it. I don't know why any of that is exactly relevant to the actions of Israel in Palestine and the West Bank. In fact, it's not. I've talked to people who are like, well, I give Israel a pass. Israel gets to do what it wants because of the history of anti-Semitism. And I'm thinking, really? They get a pass? They can do whatever they want? And okay, I sort of understand that because, yeah, it sucks. It sucks to know that, your ancestors or your great-grandparents or, maybe your grandparents or even, I have my wife's aunt escaped Lithuania just before the Nazis marched in. It's pretty scary. It's super scary stuff. But how does that mean you get to kill somebody else? I mean, that pass sounds great if you're Jewish, but what if you're Palestinian? How is that no, you don't. No one gets a pass. What was done to you in the past, what was done to your co-religionists, what was done to your family, doesn't give you license to hurt others, to kill others, to exploit others, to take advantage of others. No, none of that is the case. It may explain. There may be times when you're so angry because of something that was done to you that you lash out, you react, you're not rational in the moment. That's what we call not guilty by reason of insanity. And I understand all that. But the law rightly recognizes that some type of seeing red defense only really works if the person who's asserting that defense can demonstrate that they were excited in the moment by events that had just transpired, that occurred directly to them. So you observe your spouse being tortured, your child raped, or you hear about it very specifically, very directly. They tell you about it. In that moment, yes, you may well, I don't want to say get a pass, but you may temporarily lose the ability to judge right from wrong, which is the test. And it's the right test. It's a good test. You lose the ability because you're so overwrought that you cannot discern in that moment right from wrong. That's not what's happening in Gaza. whatever Hamas did to Israel doesn't justify now. There's no carryover whereby the Israeli Defense Forces and the Knesset and the leadership of the military in Israel is so consumed with grief and rage that they don't know right from wrong. That's not the case now. Maybe it was the case, maybe, on the night of October 7th, the morning of October 8th, for the people who were actually directly in the line of Hamas's fire. It's not the case well over a month later. Now, I think Israel gets that. I think they do. But again, what they've done demonstrates that they don't care, right? I mean, I think they get it's more, and I'll explain why I think they get that in a moment. There's more evidence, but I just want to look at just a few numbers, right? I mean, numbers are kind of sterile, and they don't show. They're not the picture like I showed of those Holocaust victims from Europe in 1945. So, numbers tell us a lot, though. They're important, but they're still somewhat removed from the reality on the ground. You can't feel the number the way you can feel seeing a dead body or a photo of a dead body. So how many Palestinians have been killed in Gaza? This is from today, December 6th, updated an hour ago when I got this, right? That's about right. So at least 16,000 Palestinians have been killed. By contrast, 1,200 were killed in Hamas's incursion into Israel, according to Israeli tallies. That's interesting, the 1,200, because I thought they were at 1,400. Obviously, that number, the number of people actually killed during the attack on the 7th. And I understand, I think it's the gray zone with Max Blumenthal, that they're calling into question whether it really happened. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm not going to go there right now. But I'm just saying, I think there are some people who are actually questioning, that there really was this Hamas attack on the 7th. Regardless, my original understanding was about 1,400 were killed. Looks like now Israel has ratcheted down that number to 1,200. Meanwhile, they've killed 10, 12, what's my math tell me? 14 times as many. 14 times 12 is about 13, 14 times as many people they've killed now. 13 to 14 times as many people Israel's killed. And they're not like the Hamas army, which Hamas doesn't have an army. They're innocent people. They're children. They're women and dads. They're moms and dads. They're grandparents. They're trans people. And all of them are people who, not, 95%, who had nothing to do with that attack. So Israel has got to know. I mean, we Jews can be called a lot of things, right? But one thing, very rarely are we called are stupid. They're not so stupid as to fail to get how bad this looks, right? And maybe they even get how bad it really is. Not forgetting how it looks. Maybe they really do get that this is just bad. It's wrong. It's evil. So what are they going to do? So what's the response? Well, here's the response is, we got to come up with something, distraction. We got to make the people hate Hamas more again, right? We gotta bring people against Hamas. We gotta turn them against Hamas and stop thinking of those Palestinians as victims, but to view them as perverts and sex criminals. That'll do it. That's the ticket. By the way, this has often been used. I mean, I was kind of amazed. I know during slave times, Jim Crow times, white supremacists would. There was, and I always think the word trope is overused, but it isn't overused when you're talking about truly racist societies where the laws actually ensconce racism and supremacy by one group over another. Then there are tropes, and the tropes are used to maintain that unjust status quo. So one of the tropes that have often been used, that's used all the time by a dominant group against an oppressed group, is that they're sexually depraved or they're sexually powerful. It's often used to describe African Americans, blacks, enslaved blacks, that they were, potent or some sort of stuff like that. I was really amazed. I was very surprised. I saw this at the Holocaust Museum. There was a lot of propaganda about Jews seducing Aryan maidens before the Holocaust, to kind of prepare Germans for killing Jews, right? Oh, they're going to seduce your daughter. They're going to steal your wife from you. And you'd have, kind of like these big nosed Jewish, cartoon characters who, the nose would be sort of a phallus type thing. I mean, this was going on. This is what the Nazis did. This is what the enslavers did in the United States to dehumanize those they were oppressing, but also to make them scary. They're coming for our women. They're coming for our children. So Israel, knowing that killing 16,000 Palestinians in retaliation for the 1,200 killed on October 7th, that doesn't go over so well. Especially when people are saying, well, wait a sec, Hamas is to the extent they do represent Palestine, they're representing a totally oppressed maybe not minority, but oppressed millions kept in an open-air concentration camp between the desert and the sea. What exactly are they supposed to do? What kind of retaliation or reaction can they possibly, make against Israel? So people are like, well, first of all, you're killing Palestinians indiscriminately, Israel. And second of all, yes, we certainly decry the violence of October 7th. But again, what options do the Palestinians have? And the answer would be not many. So how do we respond to that? Remember when Sean Hannity he used it to sort of pave the way for war on Iraq. Sean Hannity would start screaming about rape rooms, right? Was it QC? Was that Saddam Hussein's son? I think it was QC. I may have that wrong. I'm sorry. I believe it began with a Q. Had these, quote, rape rooms, unquote, where he was bringing, Iraqi women or Iraqi girls and raping them with his army, with his retinue. And I think there may have been some evidence of that, but it ultimately came out to be very, very overblown. But it would just enrage people. I remember talking to people about this, people who should have known better. Oh, but what about those rape rooms? We got to do something about that. Maybe it's not so great that we just turned Iraq into a terrorist training zone, that we just made all these, we displaced 500,000 and killed another 500,000 Iraqis. And that was just right in the moment. I mean, it's got worse and worse over time. This is what we did in 2003 in March. But what are we supposed to do? They've got these rape rooms. So that was kind of the propagandists behind war. They know pretty well how to push people's buttons so that they'll support, or at least they'll be like, okay, well, maybe we don't like it, but we got to stop it. And so the response by the Qusay, just look it up, Qusay, I think it's pronounced Qusay, Qusay Hussein. So it's pretty close. So what Netanyahu's doing, what the Israeli IDF is doing now, is saying, oh, well, they were raping corpses. That's one of the allegations, that Hamas was raping corpses on October 7th. They were raping children. They shot people in the genitals. And you can see our corporate media. This is an AP story by Sam Mednick. New signs emerge of widespread sexual crimes by Hamas. So the assumption or the allegation in that headline is there actually are signs. There is proof, there is evidence that Hamas did commit these crimes. And now Netanyahu, instead of Netanyahu on defense trying to justify the slaughter by his army in Gaza, and now not only slaughter, but the occupation. To justify that, Netanyahu is he's pointing the finger. No. We're the innocent victims of these sexual predators. I mean, congratulate yourself if you see through this crap. If you see through this nonsense. If you don't just suddenly say, oh, well, maybe it's okay what Israel's doing. Because even if it were all true, it wouldn't be okay. I was talking to my son about how the Russians hated the Germans during World and after World War II because of what the Nazis and German army did to Russia. They hated them. And so my son was saying, when they went into, and these weren't Jew lovers, right? I mean, there were Jews in the Russian army for sure, and there were Jewish officers and all that. So I'm not saying that, but the Russians were anti-Semitic too. I mean, they had been treated to the same stories of the Christ killers as the Germans had for all those years. Read Dostoevsky, right? Super popular, The Pride of Russia. Who, by the way, incredible novel. I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't a great writer. He was. You can be a great artist and be a miserable person. Dostoevsky, Picasso. There was a guy, I don't know if Francois Villon was a poet. I think it was Francois. A French poet who was a thug. He was a gangster. Who roamed the streets of Paris sticking up, whoever he could get his knife, whoever throat he could get his knife next to. And yet, at the same time, 900 years to 800, I guess he wrote in the 1300s, 14th century, something like that, I think it was around the time of the plague years, the Black Death. Poems are still read. They're really good. Caravaggio, also a thug in Rome. Paintings are still, doesn't mean you're not a great artist, even if you're a complete asshole or worse, or a murderer. So who is talking about being a great artist, but also, I don't know. I lost that thread there, but the argument, yes, again, we don't have to worry about what Israel's doing. We don't have to confront the evil of Israel because of what Hamas did with these sex crimes. And of course, it's ridiculous. It wouldn't justify any of it. Even if it were extraordinarily well documented what Hamas did, and it isn't. In fact, it's barely documented at all, if it's documented at all. The reason I say it's barely is because there are reports, but those reports aren't real credible. But that's documentation. If somebody says, well, I was there and this is what happened. The problem is some of the folks who are making those assertions are closely connected to the Israeli government, and they have been, their claims about evil done by Palestinians have been questioned in the past. So it does not appear that there are any truly objective witnesses to the alleged sex crimes by Hamas. And not only that, there's no documentary evidence in the sense of photographs, video footage. Now, there were 1,200, there were all those people at that music concert, when you think some of them would have taken out their cell phones and started videotaping, copying, recording? You'd think so. And yet, as far as I know, the IDF, the Israeli government, has failed to adduce any photographic, videographic, or even audio evidence to either prove or at least demonstrate beyond, by a preponderance of evidence, that these horrible alleged crimes by Hamas occurred. Okay, so I want to just get back to, so what my son was saying is, because the Russians hated the Nazis, and they saw what they had done, like in Auschwitz and stuff. And according to my son, I haven't read this, but I believe it's probably true. It's possibly true. Some of the Russian soldiers started, just went berserk and started shooting Nazi officers and the like. And okay, I kind of get it. That's sort of that, right? That's that temporary insanity. You're actually under great stress, great strain. You see bodies of people who have been defiled, who have been murdered in horrible ways, just lined up. And the people who did that are the same exact people who just laid waste to your country for 3-4 years, shot up lots of innocent civilians. So, yeah, I get it. They went a little crazy. And I'm not justifying it. I'm certainly not justifying the rapes, because the Russian army is pretty well documented. It was like the rape of Nanking, when the Japanese raped pretty much every woman between 8 and 80 in Nanking in 1937. That's kind of what the Red Army did in Berlin when they occupied it in 1945. So that's not okay. And what the Nazis did, one of the greatest evils of all time, and it doesn't make it okay for a lot of different reasons. And one of the reasons is that the women that they were raping, and the girls, and the, older women that they were raping, most of them weren't responsible for the Holocaust. Many of them may not have voted for, if they even had an opportunity to, the Nazis. So they are, if you don't believe in collective guilt, you can't say that, the wife of a German army, soldier, private, or for that matter, an officer or whoever, that doesn't make them guilty. But I understand the anger. It doesn't justify it. But it's a lot more understandable in this context, where you can actually see the bodies that the Germans, had just left rotting, or the cadavers, the walking corpses that were still alive. And you see some of those pictures from Bergen-Belsen, I think, concentration camp, and Auschwitz. There were some basically cadavers that were still barely alive. And, Eisenhower, walked through there, and he had the troops give them soup and stuff, and he took the picture. So you can get why people would be really angry under those circumstances. It doesn't justify reprisals with mass slaughter. Just like whatever Israel claims happened to it on October 7 doesn't justify killing 16,000 Palestinians in response. But if Hamas did what Israel says they did, where's the proof? Where's the evidence? Where's the photographs? Where's the video? I mean, it's not that hard to find. The IDF it's not that hard to find lots of documentary proof, photographic evidence of all sorts of horrible, evil things that humans do to each other. We have pictures of slavery. I mean, sort of the ability to document with a photograph as opposed to a paint and an easel. I'm sure I got Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, probably in the 1840s. Does that sound right? You've seen the Brady photographs, the Matthew Brady pictures of like of Sherman and Grant and and Abe Lincoln are amazing. I mean, they're still extraordinary art today. They don't even look dated, except for the uniforms, right? And the beards and all that. Ambrose Burnside's sideburns. But, you know, they're just as timeless as they ever were because he was an artist. He was a great artist and he knew how to take a picture. So if you look, it's not that hard. Library of Congress has pictures of slaves picking cotton. And it's awful. You can just see how horrible it doesn't take that much imagination. So where's the documents, the pictures, the photographic proof? And absent that, the forensic evidence. If Hamas was defiling corpses by raping them, how come we don't have the semen collected from that? The bodily fluids. Some Hamas militant was raping a 12-year-old girl. You mean no one managed to get a shot of that with their iPhone? I mean, come on, man. How stupid do you think we are? Well, here's the explanation. Because again, Israel's not stupid. They get how ridiculous it looks for them to claim, oh yeah, Hamas did all these awful things. That's why it's okay for us to kill them. Not even to kill them, to kill Palestinians because of what Hamas did. But yeah, we can't prove it. Why not? Well, it's really hard. It's hard to collect the evidence because the victims are dead. Most of them are dead. You know, victims are dead a lot, right? A lot of times they're dead. And yet it's still possible to get pictures of them. So here's a dead victim, right? Okay, this is a dead victim. This is a dead victim in Gaza City in the arms of, I believe that's his dad. You can see the blood of that, you know, little corpse. There's a picture. There's a picture of a dead body. There's evidence right there. Now you could say, well, Hal, okay, yeah, you've got a dead body, but how do you prove, but that's not proving rape. Okay, again, there's nobody during the October 7 attack got out their cell phone and took pictures of this happening, of what they say. There's no doctors around. A woman was shot in the vagina. You don't have the x-ray that proves that? Or the photograph that shows it? You don't have any of that? That's where I'm like, I'm not buying it. And I know why you're doing it, because you want to outrage people. Well, I am outraged, and this is what outrages me. All right, 240-242-5646. You need to be just as outraged. I understand Genocide Joe. It's sort of hard for me on this one because I really don't like Joe Biden, and I really think he's been a bad president. And I really think, you know, he's gone about as far to the left as he feels he absolutely has to go, even though he doesn't want to. I mean, I think it's, how clear could it be that he's so much more comfortable with the Joe Manchins of the world than he is with, say, the AOCs, who aren't particularly progressive anyway. But it's obvious, right? I mean, he's kept Joe as close as he possibly could, and he gave in to Joe on the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and he approved the Willow Creek project, and he's done everything he can to keep us dependent on fossil fuels and profiting the fossil fuel industry. And in fact, with the Ukraine-Russia war, we immediately started building these LNG facilities on the Gulf of Mexico, or expanding them. So Biden's instincts are all in on the right. But the fact that his refusal to say no to Israel, his refusal to take on Israel, his refusal to make anything but the most milquetoast, non-confrontational statements about Israel could lead to his loss is a little bit ironic anyway, because, right, because, you know, you hear the term Genocide Joe now that a lot of Arabs and Palestinian sympathizers are throwing around there, and I get it. I mean, I think it's not an unfair term exactly, But the irony is that if it helps Trump, you're actually helping somebody who's even worse on this issue. I don't say Trump's worse on every issue. He's not as bad on Ukraine, Russia. He's not as bad on trade. But he's pretty bad on a lot of issues, and probably on balance worse than Biden, I'll grant you. But the irony is that those who are so legitimately angry at Biden for his support, his unwavering support for Israel, the great irony is that they may help elect somebody who's even worse on this topic, the topic that they care about. And I don't know where you get around that, because I'm not saying you should vote for Biden. I sure as heck don't. I just think it's a little bit, it just shows you the state of our non-democracy, that the choices are that bad. And you know, I was all in for Dr. West, but he's clearly doesn't get how to win, how to build a progressive movement. His failure to stay with the Green Party proves that. So yeah, I support Jill Stein. I think we all should rally behind her. I'd like to see the Arab population, by the way, is pretty sizable in Michigan, and that's where they have said, we're not going to support Biden. We're just not going to vote for him, which could well elect Trump, right? I mean, if it comes down to Michigan, which it could, that's not so implausible now, is it? If it comes down to Michigan, Biden could lose if those Arab American and Palestinian sympathizing voters decide they're staying home. That could absolutely tip. It's very, very plausible that could cost Biden the election and lead to Trump's election. Now, re-election. Now, that doesn't, whatever. They're both bad, right? But again, the irony is that as bad as Biden is, as bad as Genocide Joe is on Israel, Palestine, Trump's even worse. All right, 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. 240-242-5646. I thought that whole kind of back and forth in the New York Times was so fascinating. The woman who goes to visit her parents, she's American. Her parents have moved to Israel, and they are not happy that their daughter has simply said, it's not complicated. It's not challenging. It's not difficult. You just don't kill people. Just don't kill people. And yet, what I'm seeing over and over, and it dismays me to no end, that so many, maybe more Jews than not, are coming with every possible reason to say it's okay to kill people, to distract us. Well, what about what they did to us? What about the Holocaust? What about Jewish history? All of those somehow in their argument, I don't know if it's in their minds, I don't know if their minds, where their minds are, but somehow that supposedly justifies this. And that's where I really don't get it. I just don't really see that. I don't understand how it doesn't work for me. It just doesn't, that I can't accept that. And I don't think it's because I don't remember the Holocaust. I think it's because maybe because I do remember the Holocaust. I mean, not like actually lived through it, but I remember it in the sense that it's in my mind pretty vividly, having been taught about it from, a young age, having heard about it from my family at Jewish school, religious school, whatever. And, that memory, those thoughts, to me, are 100% consistent with what Louisa Kornblatt says here. It feels so simple. Just don't murder people. Right? The Nazis murdered 6 million Jews. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Roma people, maybe 1 million of them. Those were sort of the direct targets who were really subject just to direct murder, but also some Slavic people were considered inferior. So my takeaway from the Holocaust, first and foremost, beyond even Jews are the eternal victim, Jews are always going to be persecuted, Jews need their own country where they'll be safe. No, my takeaway is just don't kill people. How do we stop the murders? By whoever group, by any group. And so Louisa Kornblatt nails it. It's not complicated, as Lily says also from AT&T. It's not complicated. All right. Let's see. Do we have anything else I really want to get to? We have no proof of the sex crimes, no forensic evidence. Let me just move on real quick. I got about 10 more minutes left. I was hoping to talk to you. 240-242. 5646. 240-242-5646. By the way, any comments? Let me see, because I'm supposed to be checking those. I don't see comments here. I do see yet another subscriptions going up very, very, very slowly. Should be going up fast, fast, fast. But they're going slow, slow. But I guess better slow than never, right? Better slow than not. So at this, by the way, if you were keeping track, yes, I started my program today. The live stream was a couple hours later than usual. I was at this rally. I went for my friend Ed. Well, I went because I believe in it. But I was asked by a friend to go, and I certainly felt an obligation to support him. By the way, that's how you know someone's a good organizer, is if they can get folks to come to events and they can push the right buttons to get people to do. So that's sometimes not really so comfortable, so pleasant to go get out of there, go drive somewhere, take a bus, bicycle. You don't always want to do that. Sometimes you do, other times you don't. So well done, Ed. And maybe we'll get him on. So what we're talking about here is what's called, and I mentioned this before, one fair wage. See how I can. Sure you can. I want to keep myself on the screen, but I also want you to read that. I got to get this as full. I think this should be pretty legible. I'm hoping so. Let's see if I can get it there. Oh, I've got a little that. So here's where, we definitely do need, I believe, it's definitely the right thing to get rid of this sub-minimum wage for tip workers. They say the federal sub-minimum wage for tip workers is just $2.13 an hour. I think it's $3.63. I don't know what number I gave you earlier. It's $3.25. It's $3.63 here in Maryland. It's crazy. I mean, no one can live on that. It's supposed to be, the understanding is, supplemented by tips. And, that works in a lot of restaurants. But in places like Denny's, the lower, and the reason I say Denny's, not McDonald's, is because McDonald's doesn't have tip workers. The workers at McDonald's just get paid the minimum wage or above that by McDonald's. Nobody at McDonald's, the person who takes your order behind the counter, or when you drive up to the drive-in window, they're getting paid minimum wage or more by McDonald's. So, but that's not the case at the Denny's or the IHOP or the Pancake House or wherever. Restaurants like that, Waffle House, right? I mean, those, and I pick those not to pick on them, but those are, restaurants where many people probably can get in and out for as little as $10 or less dollars. And they may tip the server a couple bucks, $2, $5.50, right? I mean, they say you should give 15 to 20%. I always give more because I just feel like they work hard and they don't make that much money, and I'm very fortunate. I can afford to pay a little more, so I do. But that's not the case for a lot of people, especially at restaurants, like a lot of clientele at a place like and again, not picking on Denny's, although the food there's real. I mean, I don't know how people can eat that stuff, to be honest with you. Same with the waffle. Oh, I was there. It was awful. Just inedible, really. But that's not really the point. I'll say this: you get your money's worth, I suppose. People who go to those restaurants, they're not rich. they're going there because they, it's on their way to work or from work, or they're taking a break. They work really, really hard. They don't want to cook dinner. I mean, there's a lot of different explanations. But one of them isn't they got a lot of money. They got money to burn and they're burning a hole in their pocket. You go, you work at one of those restaurants and you're not getting big tips. Bills aren't big. And the people who work there don't have a lot of money. The people who eat there don't have a lot of money. Maybe they give what they can. So these are, so there's good reason to have this, to end the tip wage, the sub-minimum tip wage, and say to Denny's, and because it's, that's a big corporation. They can afford it. For the hell, they can't. Of course they can afford it. You got to pay your workers a fair wage. Period. Every single one of them. And it's tough for other reasons too. If you're like most of the servers at those lower end restaurants tend to be women. I believe that's absolutely documented proof. True. And if you're dependent on on your customer for your payment, not your employer, you put up with a lot of crap. They get sexually harassed. They get, teased, all sorts of uncomfortable behavior. And I don't mean tease like, oh, it's a funny, good way. I mean, like tease in a nasty way. And they have to put up with it. And again, women are bearing the brunt for a lot of reasons. Most of the harassers in the world are men. And most men are heterosexual. So they're going to be targeting younger women and girls who work in these restaurants. They're victims. They really are. They have to put up with it. And we should point this out in our campaign. But I think the campaign should also be more universal. It shouldn't just be about, and I give it to One Fair Wage. It says economic, racial, and gender justice. But if you go to one of these events, the focus is so much on how the victims of the sub-minimum wage are women and they're Black or maybe Latino. And not only that, the minimum wage itself is a vestige of slavery. That is an argument they make over all the time. And it's not really true. I mean, there were tips before, well, I don't know if they were before slavery, but there were tips in Europe in places where there wasn't slavery in evidence. There might have been serfdom, there might have been peasants who had few rights, but there wasn't quite the same as American generational slavery. But tips do absolutely maintain inequality, inequity. No question. We should talk about it. But I think the way you win these arguments is you don't divide people into groups who are victims and victimizers. You talk about a united coalition that's multi-race, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, that all will benefit. So yes, it is true that those who get paid the least in the restaurant industry are women of color. But it's also true that there are white men who aren't making nearly as much as they should or as much as they need to support their families in the restaurant industry. It's true that there are men who are being sexually harassed in restaurants because they're dependent on tips. This is all true also. And I think for us to win, when I say win, make a better world for all, the way you get there is unite folks, unite people behind policies that will lead to broad improvement in their lives. And I'm not seeing that quite the way I want to see it in One Fair Wage. All right, that's just something to bear in mind. This is, this program is all about, as far as I envision it, my theory of change is you come up with areas where poor, struggling, and working people together will join forces, or you can persuade them to join forces to make life better for them. And I think one fair wage and the sub-minimum wage for tip workers is a good way. But I think the way you unite people by pointing out how doing so will make life better for all workers, not just, or certainly for all tipped workers, not just tipped workers who are women and of color. And that's why even in the end, as much as I do support this issue, it's kind of piecemeal, right? It takes one class of workers and says, we're going to make life better for you, which is a good thing. We should do that. But I want progressives to organize around the big issues that will make life better for just about everyone, like Medicare for all, like debt-free education, period, like a secure retirement, like a smart trade policy that includes tariffs as the primary way to bring jobs back to this country. Those are policies that poor, struggling, working people won't view as zero-sum game. They won't see it as, well, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. If everyone gets health care free at the point of delivery, there's no cost to poor, struggling, and working people. It's all win for them. It's all gravy. And that's likewise if we're going to bring jobs back to this country with tariffs and other economic incentives. That's gravy for working people. That means their wages go up. I know you'll hear people say, oh, but the prices are going to go up too. You can make an iPhone for so much cheaper in Asia. Last I checked, iPhones were well over $1,000. How many working people are buying those? All right, folks. I'll be back tomorrow. It will be, no, wait, today's Wednesday. Thursday, I'll be back Thursday. Of course, tomorrow's Thursday. I'll be back Thursday. I'll be doing the free-for-all Friday. And by the way, it is, kind of the holiday season, right? I sort of would say so because it is December. So I hope you're enjoying the holiday season. I actually am myself, so for whatever that's worth.